Good morning, everybody. Wow, this is a full house. I apologize, I don't speak, nor do I understand Finnish. I think you had a few good jokes. I'm sure my jokes won't be as good as yours. I didn't understand the opening song, but then I did understand the body language, so at least that part worked for me. Let me start by maybe trying my one word in Finnish that I think I understand, which is kiitos. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I treasure these moments a great deal, and I'm very honored to have this stage and to be able to talk to you. I think I actually did understand two words in the previous speech, which were open learning. I think at some point it came up. Those of you who know a little bit of what I've been doing in the last so many years know that I'm very much an open guy. And so one of the things I will do, obviously, is upload my slides a little bit later this afternoon. So they're there for you, and I hope they're useful for you. But let's get to the topic of this morning's conversation. I want to talk to you about learning analytics. And I wonder always when I do these talks, you know, what do you have in your mind when I say learning analytics? Maybe I should start by asking, whom amongst you has ever heard of the term learning analytics? There's a few people here and there, but not so many, a few of you. Just to maybe point out to you that this is very much a topic that's in the air now and that people are discussing. This is a report that came out, I think, about a week ago from the US Department of Education on learning analytics. And I happen to not completely agree with everything that's in there, but that doesn't matter. At least they think it's something they need to consider and maybe invest in. Actually, talking of invest in, both the National Science Foundation in the US and the next call for technology-enhanced learning in the European Commission, they both mention explicitly learning analytics. The NSF has a special call for that, and then the next ICT call from the European Union has a little paragraph on learning analytics. So hey, one reason to try and take notice is you may be able to apply for some funding and do some work on learning analytics, even though maybe you're not completely sure what it is. Actually, even in the community, and I'll talk a little bit about what it is, but even in the community that is working on learning analytics, there is some debate about what it really is all about. And I try to do my best to come up with a definition. And the basic idea is that as your learners, as your teachers, do more of what they do online, they leave a lot of traces of their activities. Every link they click on, every blog post they make, every blog comment they make, every tweet they do, it's all out there and it's all available to be used to get a good idea of what they're doing. That sounds very vague, and I'll make it a little bit more concrete in a moment. But anyway, in my idea, what we try to do is we try to collect these traces of what people do, and then we try to make sense of what we find. And of course, at this moment, you may ask, why would you even want to do that? I mean, why is this interesting? If learning analytics is the solution, then what is the problem? Okay. And in my view, it certainly, my personal history, my personal reasons for being interested in this topic are that I've been very much engaged, as some of you know, in this open learning concept, right? And so, for instance, at this moment, I'm also teaching, because I had 2 tweets from my students while I was sitting there listening, trying to listen to the previous speech. My students, and I'm sure many of you do this sort of thing, my students blog everything they do. All of my courses are completely online. We have face-to-face activities, but all of the resources are there for you to reuse if you want. We have hashtags for the courses. My students blog, they comment on blogs. We have external people blogging, and it's all great. It's a different topic. I sometimes do talks about that, and I think we will hear more about open working and open learning in the next speech as well. And if you're interested in this topic, please come talk to me. I'm still here. But as you start doing this, what you will find out is it becomes very difficult to have a clear idea of what your students are doing, because there's so much going on. Okay, my students do not tweet about my course between 6 and 9 a.m. That's all. So that's 3 hours. So we have 21/7 activity. And I also need a few hours of sleep, from time to time. And if you think these courses, and these are simple courses, sometimes it's 60 students at the university. My biggest course at the university has 600 students, that's a little bit more. But we've also, quite a few of us, been doing these MOOCs. Who's heard of MOOCs? Okay, a few of you. Massive open online courses. These are courses where everybody can register on the net, okay? And so, for instance, I've been involved in one of them, which is Change 12, I think we call it. It's been running from September until, I think it runs another 5 or 6 weeks. And if you want to have an idea of the activity, this was a little bit of a busy day maybe, but the activity in one day in this course, this is just people making contributions to the conversation in one day, okay? Okay, this was a slightly more busy day than the average day. But this sort of activity goes on for 8 months. Now, I don't know about you. You're certainly much more organized than I am and much more effective and efficient in your work, but it gets a little bit hard to keep up with, okay? And so this idea of learning analytics was, as all these people have all these activities going on, actually, as many of you are tweeting here now at the conference and doing your presentations and posting your slides, and as we have all these digital traces of what is going on, can we not find other ways to process that information and to present it back so you can make better contributions and all the sort of management of day-to-day activities is taken from you? And as we work on this topic, we get a lot of our inspiration from a bigger movement. There's actually a lot of people doing similar things outside of learning as well. And that movement is often referred to as quantified self. Whom amongst you has heard of quantified self? It's probably always the same 10% who have heard of everything. In quantified self, what people try to do is to measure a lot of activities that they carry out in their daily lives. And it's often talked about as self-knowledge through self-tracking. And actually, maybe a few of you are doing quantified self, even if you don't know you're doing it, okay? Because certainly in my group, when we work on our learning applications, we get a lot of our inspiration more specifically from sports software. Maybe now I think I will see probably a few more hands. Whom amongst you is a regular jogger? Okay, many more. Or maybe I should ask Nordic walking, because yeah, I know you do, and I've seen quite a few people doing that here. And I guess amongst those of you who do that, how many of you carry like a mobile device and that maybe tracks how far you go, how fast you go, where you run or jog? Let me see the hands. So there's a lot of you, okay? And probably many of you are also using software like Runkeeper, or Nike has something. I mean, a lot of companies have things like Track My Races is another one, where you can, and I do the same thing, where, this is my run. I live next to the river in Antwerp in Belgium, one of my runs. And many of us sort of use that to figure out, am I making progress? How is my training going? That sort of thing. And the idea is a little bit, could we not do the same thing for learning? Could we not then help people with their learning program? Okay. And we're also looking at, by the way, physical sensors, type of like the fitness. I think one guy tweeted this morning that he was going for an early run because of ITK. And I'm not sure if he was using a Fitbit, but he could have. Fitbit tracks your activity. Whom amongst you has one? Maybe I should ask. Okay, nobody, I think. Well, someone has one. So you can all come see the Fitbit device a little bit later with her. Fitbit basically just tracks all of your physical activity. And then there is, I had one tweet this morning from a guy who was just on his scale and weighing how much he weighs. And he tweets his weight every morning. And he calls it a social experiment in getting to my ideal weight, because you build up pressure with your peers for doing an activity that you want to do. Actually, some of these sensors, the Fitbit amongst others, can also track the quality of your sleep and give you feedback about, well, maybe you should get a little bit more, maybe a little bit earlier, a bit later, that sort of thing. And what they do, and then I'll get to the learning thing, what they also try to do, many of these devices, is to translate it into a goal that you can work towards. And I think this is a big issue in learning. We're collecting a lot of activities of our students, and I want to translate it back into something that they can use to guide their activities in the day. Let me make that much more concrete. For instance, maybe next time I come to Finland, I should at least try to understand 10 words or 20 words, which is a big thing for me. I'm not a good language learner. Or for instance, somewhat recently, I learned some Italian, and I had this simple rule for myself: I will do 5 words of Italian every day. And if I do that 2 months, at least I can, order a coffee and that sort of thing. And it's actually not so difficult with simple mobile applications, for instance, to regularly check that you've learned 5 new words. And then you can translate it into an easy goal. In fact, like they do with the sports thing as well, where you can wear a little like an arm brace that indicates how well you're making progress towards your goal. In this case, it's about physical activity, and it's about a Nike sensor that will then translate into little dots, and you can just say, okay, I need to have so many of these dots every day. And the idea is, if I've not been very active today, I'll take the stairs rather than the elevator because I want to do enough activity for today. But translate it to learning. If I haven't learned enough words today, maybe I'll take 10 minutes and sit on the side and do my 5 words of Italian today. Okay, and so we're getting a lot of our inspiration from these applications that actually also go quite a little bit further than just collecting information. Okay. One of the things you can do, for instance, with the running applications, I didn't go for a run here yesterday. It would have been obvious where to run, but I travel a lot and it's not always so obvious. So what you can also do is say, okay, well, is there a good track to run close to where I am today? And then it will show you tracks that other people have been using with a similar running pattern to yours that are close to where you are at that moment. I did this a few weeks ago in Porto, in Portugal. I didn't know the city very well. I ended up after 2 minutes at a very nice sports facility with an excellent run track. I had no idea it's there, but Runtrack knows, or Runkeeper knows, because there are so many people going there. In fact, they also do a lot of interesting work that we just steal, which is another word for that inspires us, on motivation. And so, for instance, if with Runkeeper, which I've been using quite a bit, if you stop running for a while, you get a message that says, you haven't been running so much. And actually, that's quite common. Many people who jog, after a while lose a little bit of their motivation. You know what we can do for you? We can team you up with someone in your local community who has a similar running pattern. He doesn't run much faster, much slower. He runs about the same distance, the same speed, and the same intensity, the same frequency as you do. Do you want us to put you in touch with this person? Or what you can also do is, it will get your Twitter friends, and then it will make you run virtually together with someone else. So I can go back home and I can run with Jarmo. Tomorrow, we'll both be running. You will be running here or close to here, and I'll be running back in Belgium, but we sort of motivate one another. Now, transpose this to learning. What if I have a problem with my 5 words of English? Or, sorry, I do 5 words of English, that's okay. But my 5 words of Italian, what if my learning application would say, Erik, you haven't been doing your 5 words very well the last 3-4 days. Maybe it's been very busy, then it's okay. But if you need some help, I can team you up with a guy in Norway. And he's doing the same thing. He knows about the same words you do. He also has the same goal. He has about as much or as little time as you. Why don't you do this together? So it's very much about awareness, being aware of what you do as a learner, and about supporting self-reflection about your learning. By the way, we know, I think many of you know better than I do, we know that if our learners take a little bit of time to self-reflect, to think about what they're doing from time to time, we know that they become better learners. Okay? So we've been developing these learning applications that are similar to the running application, and actually what we do in my team is we make the students design, or at least they're involved in the design of the application. So this, for instance, is one of the applications that my students developed. We didn't do that, okay? And it's a very simple, by design, a very simple application that runs on your mobile and that basically, like, the display you have in your car, it gives you a rough idea of progress in the course. I guess this student is doing sort of okay, but could be better, okay? And then it also tracks activities that are relevant for you in the course, and it will help you to to access those. So in this case, this student needs to check some Twitter messages about the course, and there's also some information in the RSS feeds that he needs to process. Behind the scenes, by the way, we collect a lot of very sophisticated data. We can talk about it in the next session when I have half an hour for a conversation about how we do that technically. Behind the scenes, this is one view of all the detailed data we have of every student. Every student is a line in this big table view, as we call it. Okay? And as a teacher, but also the students, I'm about open learning, right? Actually, even you can go check everything all of my students do in all of my courses and give them feedback. And then you get like breakout diagrams that show you more of the details. And of course, we translate this into something a little bit more simple for the students to make more regular use of. Back to our surprise, though, we have a nice paper about that in a conference in a week from now. To our surprise, even the students spend 10, 20 minutes a week on this table to track what they're doing and to track what their fellow students are doing. What they use more often, though, is typically this sort of simple display that they typically, as they're queuing for lunch, they go like, how am I doing with my course here? And they check their progress. And this shows you how much you've been doing until now, all of the course, and then the upper part is in the last 7 days. How well have you been doing? And there's other people doing other applications that are similar to this. Let me just quickly go through them. We do a lot of visualization. It becomes a little bit complex. Other people do that as well. This is from Wollongong University in Australia, where you get like a really clear view of how the students are interacting during the course. Okay. Now, of course, I'll skip over this. Whoops. One of the big issues here is what can we actually measure? And I can tell you what I measure with my students, okay? I measure with them, I track with them every minute they spend on my course. I track how much time, obviously, and when they do that. I track what they produce in terms of blog posts and tweet messages and that sort of thing. I track every social interaction. If you make a comment on his blog, if she makes a reply to your tweet, we track all of that, and we also track where they learn. And that's sort of interesting. And that helps us. But of course, what we really would like to learn, or what we really would like to track, is how well they learned. And that's much more difficult. And that's one of the topics that we're most focused on today. What can we measure automatically that gives us a good idea of how much they've learned? And I'll mention one more issue. We can pick it up again in the discussion a bit later. There's, of course, big issues here also about Big Brother and privacy, because I know a lot about my students. I probably know more about what they do in the course than their parents do. Sometimes I think know more than they know. Right? And so I talk a lot about them, about why I do that and what that means, etc., etc. I also think that our perception of what is acceptable and what is an intrusion into privacy is shifting. This is a nice book about that if you want to know more about that. As more and more of these quantified self applications are beginning to appear, this is going to become way bigger an issue, because I think many of you really underestimate how much you're being tracked already right now. And we need to have some clear consensus in society about what is permissible and what is not. I can tell you what I do. What I do is I tell my students, I take about an hour and a half at the start of a course to explain to my students why I do this sort of learning analytics. And I show them in a very open way. And I tell them, everything I see, you can see too. Actually, everything I see and you can see, the whole world can see. We may have some discussion about whether it's appropriate, but at least it's not hidden. It's very open. Okay. So maybe, I only had a little bit of time to scratch the surface. Maybe you want to get started with that. I'd love to have that conversation with you. We can do so in the next session and also in the rest of the day. If you're sort of interested in this topic by now, we've started a society on learning analytics research called SOLAR. We also started an annual conference series. We're 20 years later than ITK, but okay, you have to start somewhere. And the next one is actually in 2 weeks from now in Vancouver. And so you're very welcome to join us there, or there's a lot of information on the web as well. Also, I can give you, I think it's public by now, so I can give you, like, I think you're my first big audience that I tell this to, the LAC conference, or the Learning Analytics conference, not this year, that's in Vancouver in 2 weeks. Next year, it'll actually be organized in Leuven, in Belgium. I'll be organizing it. And anyway, I'm very interested to know what you think about this learning analytics thing. It's a little bit bleeding edge. It's a little bit unclear how it's going at the moment. Lots of people have lots of questions. So do I. Well, let me know what you think. You know, you can find me on the blog. You can find me on Twitter. I have a few papers on this topic. And with that, I'll happily round off for now. And then I'll take some questions later on, I guess, after the session is over. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Erik. I think that the topic is extremely important, and I think you have now plenty of friends in the area of the learning analytics. As you can see, we have these ITK hats. For the minister, I told the minister that it helps him to see the future. Your version will help to be more analytical when you are running, and this is the winter version of the ITK hat. So we are looking forward to you using that while you are running on the riverside and back home. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you.
Thank you.